So welcome and thank you for coming to the first Wildcatalyst seminar of the academic year. I'm Chelsea DiGiuseppe. I'm the marketing manager of UNHInnovation. This year's Wildcatalyst seminar, our theme is launching research-based startups, and our aim is to help to demystify the startup process and explore opportunities, challenges, and pitfalls of launching a business by hearing about real-life successes and failures from the innovators and entrepreneurs themselves. So while the general topics will be universal to all entrepreneurial-minded individuals, there will be an emphasis on starting a business around university research-born innovations. And so we're really excited to explore this intersection of entrepreneurship and academia. So we're shaping up to have a great lineup of speakers this year. Next month, we'll actually be hearing from our own Dr. Kevin Short, who is in the room with us right now. He is a UNH mathematics professor and founder of CDM Technologies, and that will be on Thursday, October 26th. So hope you can join us. Before I introduce our speakers, I'll just go over a few words of thanks and housekeeping. So following today's presentation, we invite you to stay for appetizers and beverages. And just as a reminder, you have to be 21 to partake in the beer. Sorry. And I just want to say thank you to our generous sponsors. This year we have Hamilton Brooks Smith Reynolds, which is a full-service intellectual property law firm. And we actually had sign up Eric Balicki, Keith Wood, Mary Lou Wakimura, and Michael Gottselig from HBSR, and hopefully they'll be here today. I don't know if they're in the room at all yet, but hopefully they'll be here today. Say hello. And we have Finch & Maloney, a Manchester-based law firm that provides intellectual property counseling and services to technology companies. And we have Saunders and Silverstein, a law firm that's based in Amesbury, Mass, and provides services related to trademark, copyright, internet, software, and entertainment law. Now for the good stuff. Our speakers this evening are Dr. Wayne Jones, who's the Dean of UNH College of Engineering and Physical Sciences and co-founder of ChromaNanoTech. And we also have his fellow co-founder and ChromaNanoTech CEO, Dr. Bill Bernier, who is a research professor at Binghamton University, as well as a 34-year industry veteran. They'll be talking about how their business venture took shape and discuss the challenges, the lessons learned, and successes and failures while they were launching a business, specifically one based on university IP. All right, so thank you for joining us. Take it away.
Thanks, Chelsea. I'm going to go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Wayne Jones. I'm the new Dean of the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences. I've been a happy resident of New Hampshire now for 8 weeks. So we're getting, actually it was 12 weeks, but for 4 of them I was living in the Holiday Inn, so I don't really count those 4 weeks. What I'd like to do today is tell you a little bit of a story, and I'm going to do it along with my colleague, and I'm going to set it up kind of from a faculty member's perspective, because that was how I got into this game and where I came from. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and what leads us in. I was following a traditional path. I did my Ph.D., did a postdoc in Texas, and then ended up as an assistant professor at a small research university, medium-sized research university, about the same size as UNH, in New York. Young assistant professor. I'm just looking to push new ideas out there, and I'm trying lots of stuff, and I'm submitting lots of proposals, and some of them get funded and most of them don't. And at the same time, I'm interested in how I might be able to pivot so I can apply some of these ideas, do fundamental research, and yet apply this in a real-world scenario. And so I find myself walking down a road that eventually takes me to meeting my colleague Bill Bernier and launching what is now a successful startup company that's on the road. And between point A and point B is the most non-linear process you've ever seen. And so I want to talk to you about that a little bit, and that's kind of how I want to set you up. I would say that when we're talking to our students, and how many of you teach students in the room? How many of you are students in the room? Okay. One of the things that we struggle with is that oftentimes our students come in here to UNH, and they've been very, very good students. And they get to UNH, and they get an 85 on an exam when they're used to getting hundreds on everything they've ever written. And one of the things that I want to impart to my students I also want to impart to faculty. And that is that you are hereby authorized to fail miserably. It's okay to stumble. And I think that too often, both faculty and freshmen have it in their heads that they can't make a mistake and they can't fail and that failure is a problem. I will tell you the biggest key to the success that we've had with this new company was the first company that I built or tried to build. So let me tell you that story. That story starts in my second year as an assistant professor. I did not have a major research grant. I had a small teaching grant at that time. Several NSFs and NIHs were pending, but nothing. And a group came into my office that was, oops, got to get it going the right way. That was a physics professor, a member of industry from the area, another member from a photographic company, and an entrepreneur. And they came into my office because they knew that I was working on transition metal dyes, and they thought these dyes would be useful. And we met every week for about 6 weeks, and we started calling ourselves the band because we would get together and we would drink coffee. I would drink Diet Coke. And we would just brainstorm these ideas. And what we came up with was an imaging technology that would use the dyes that I was creating in the lab, combine them with polymer systems to make highly colorimetric X-ray films that could be used to give you, imagine, a full color X-ray. So you're getting density information, you're getting some chemical information, all in a full color image off of an X-ray, and you were doing it off of a portable X-ray machine, so you could do it. In fact, our target was things that were related to veterinary medicine, because there was a big demand there. To make a long story short, it lasted about 14 months, and then it crashed and burned in a glorious manner. Why did it crash and burn? Well, first of all, I was an assistant professor, and I was the person that was supposed to be developing the core technology. I had one graduate student in the lab, a couple of undergraduates. I didn't have all my equipment yet, and I'd never taught a course before. All of these demands on my time were sucking me in every different direction, and I was not able to put in the time that I needed to. I was also really used to writing NSF grants, right? So we had this brilliant idea. We're going to write proposals. We're going to get SBIR funding. We're going to get money from industry. We're going to write proposals. I know how to write NSF proposals. Those don't work in that environment. They don't work at all. So every proposal I wrote, when I had time to write them, was panned terribly because I was writing to the wrong audience. I wasn't writing to the right place at all. I had no idea what the market for this looked like. Were there competing technologies out there? Was there anybody that would buy it? Did anybody care? I was an assistant professor. I didn't care. I needed to find funding, write papers, get students. What's a market? I had no idea. No idea of competing IP. I knew the literature. My colleagues knew the literature. Doesn't mean you know the IP space. Doesn't mean you know whether or not someone's got a patent that's out there that you're infringing on and you don't even know it. And even if you do think that you can write a patent, it is nothing like writing a paper. And if you don't have any support as you're doing that IP, both legal support, financial support, and market support, knowing what other patents are out there, you're really going to be clueless in that arena. And then finally, I had a belief that I knew how to run a research group. I came from a large research group. I was growing a large research group, so I should be able to run a company. Running a company is nothing like running a research group, right? The workforce is different. They respond to you differently, and they actually don't work for you. They're like a whole bunch of free agents all the time, and they're being drawn in other directions. They're being drawn toward their courses. They're being drawn toward their teaching assistant assignments. They're being drawn toward other life issues. So for all those reasons, and I'll tell you the biggest was IP. The reason that it was such a glorious crash and burn, I won't tell you the whole story. After Bill and I have a few glasses of wine later, maybe I'll tell him the whole story. The reason that it crashed and burned was because, true enough, we were infringing on another patent, and we had no idea it was coming. And the first time that we went out in any sort of manner to show what we were doing, we had what was the equivalent of lawsuits coming in our direction like crazy. I'm an assistant professor. My colleagues that were on campus dropped me like a hot potato, and no one on the outside really understood anyway. So it was glorious. And I was terrified, and I never wanted to go back. Fortunately, some of my grants got funded. My papers got published. My research group grew, and that's a good thing. And after I got tenure, I still had this bent. I still had this bias saying, boy, it'd be nice if some of my technology I could orient in this direction. I had at that point gotten a couple of patent disclosures out there. I had an opportunity to do my sabbatical with a guy named Alan McDiarmid, a Nobel Prize winning chemist at the University of Pennsylvania. He was very applied oriented. We got another patent together. That was actually my first one that was officially awarded by the US Patent Office. And we started to think about, I don't know why, but this does not want to, all right. We started to think about moving toward a company again. And so I'm grabbing this and I want to highlight the article. This is a Science article from 2012. That if you're thinking about going down this road of starting a business from a university type of a research environment, I strongly recommend you go give it a read. It's a solid 8-9 page journal article. But what you're going to find is it lays out these key priorities. And the first thing that I would tell any assistant professor or associate professor or full professor, know what it is and what you're trying to do. What are really your priorities? Because if you're doing this just to land another grant, this is not a good path for you to go down. I would refer you back to slide 2, which said failure is in your immediate future. 90% of startups are going to fail. If you're coming out of a university environment, the odds are actually higher that it's going to fail, unless you get some smart people around you. I think you've got to figure out your path. What does that path look like in terms of how are you going to fit it into your research life? And what's your path going to be on campus? Most campuses, particularly public institutions like ours, it's even worse if you're on a private campus, have IP offices. They know the value of the IP. One of my colleagues likes to joke that if you breathe their air, they own it. So if you're on campus, you're in range, you're breathing from their trees, it belongs to them. You need to know how you're going to navigate through that path. Managing conflict of interest. We don't think about conflict of interest much as faculty. But in reality, there are major conflicts of interest here. I will tell you in the story that Bill is going to tell you, because I'm going to let him tell the company story that we developed. But one of the weirdest situations I ever had was we had a patent pending technology that the university owned, and I had to negotiate with myself because I'm in the company, I'm at the university, and how do you negotiate that? Because now the company's got to negotiate with the university, and I'm on both sides of that. Take it a step further. I ran a research group. At one time, I had 25 people in the research group. Students need to know if they're working on something that is related to a small company, and if you might get any personal benefit from that. We literally had to develop a conflict of interest policy that everyone in my lab, undergraduate to senior graduate student, had to sign the conflict of interest, acknowledging that they were working on fundamental science, but that some of that fundamental science might turn into a patent and could go toward the company. And for a few of them it did. And a few of those ended up with their names on those patents. And we've been able to push a couple of them out. And Bill will tell you more about that. Ultimately, I think the last point is the most important one, what is the return on investment for your time as a faculty member to go in this direction? Financial is not a good answer to that question. Growing jobs for a student, a little bit better, but not great. You really have to be passionate because you're about to put your time and energy from your personal time into this company. You're about to put your own cash into this company because I tell you, I don't know of any successful that didn't put some of their own cash in. And you're also about to give up some of those other things that faculty like to do because you're not going to have time, right? And I'm not talking about teaching. You're still going to have to teach. Good luck buying out courses because the probability of that working by this path is really low. But you are going to find that you're not going to have as much time to perhaps go to some of those student activities. Your group might shrink because of these activities. Some of the mentoring you do with graduate students is going to disappear because it's going to end up being at the company. And because of your conflict of interest policy, you're not going to be able to talk with them there. You're going to have to only talk with them here. And that gets messy. So you got to think very carefully about what is the return on investment? Why are you doing this? All that being said, I don't want to scare you away because I think there is some value and I think there are lots of opportunities. So let me tell you a story. And the story is going to be in kind of two parts. I'm going to tell you the setup. I'm going to tell you how Bill and I met and started to engage. And then I'm going to let him take over and tell you how ChromaNanoTech came into being and where we are today and what our circuitous path was. So for me, This starts with a couple of chemists that were running a small company in Binghamton that literally imagine, there was a company called, well, geez, I want to go back to GAF, or it was a photographic film company. Anyone that was born after 1990 may not know what photographic film was, but for those of us that know the photographic film industry, this was a high player. Kodak, Polaroid were not competitors because they produced the uber high-end stuff that only Universal Studios, the motion picture manufacturers, film. The dyes that went into that were produced at this place in Binghamton. It went out of business largely because it was just bought up. The market was getting too small. Everybody was being bought by Kodak, or it's being bought by Xerox, and so they lost in the buy everybody out mode. A couple of their chemists, though, knew how to make some really cool organic dyes that had some really high-end applications. And so they set up in their garage and started producing these things. Now, the good news for them was they found a market. They understood the market. They had a unique skill set. These are all valuable things for a startup. They put a lot of their money in. They ended up investing a lot of their own cash in, a lot of their own time in. And after about 10 years, they turned the corner and they started being profitable out of their garage. They did learn, and I will share this with you from a startup perspective, they did learn that when you might be 4 or 5 really good friends at the beginning, but over a decade, some of those friends get older and they get ornery and they become less friendly. And when there's actual dollars on the table, when you're all losing money, no one cares how you divide the pie. But when there's $2 million of profit in a year, someone cares about how you divide the pie. And so they were learning these things. They came to me because they had some ideas of trying to grow their market, and they had absolutely no equipment and no expertise to do anything except the synthetic dyes that they knew. And so they came to me, and we had a series of meetings sponsored by a program that is funded by New York State that catalyzes these conversations. And so they came and they met me in my office, and for a series of a couple of weeks we had these great meetings. And one of the problems they came to me with was, we have these great dyes, and companies keep coming to us and wanting to use them because they are the best, most selective optical dyes you could imagine. Very high bandwidth, so they can knock out 1 or 2 nanometers from the electromagnetic spectrum at enormously high extinction coefficients. But all their companies needed them to survive like blow molding and melt casting and spinning. And that required them to survive high temperature. And they said, if we could take our current dyes and just make them live beyond 100 degrees C, life would be good. And at that time, I had this crazy idea, and I called in one of my graduate students. Maybe we could do something here. Now, about that exact same time, not for that meeting, but I want to say within 3 months of that meeting, it was really close. If you really want to find a good business partner, what do? You go to your daughter's soccer game. That's a great place, great place. So I'm at a soccer game. I kept the book for the women's soccer team for years and years and years. And after one game, I was standing next to this gentleman, and I introduced myself. His daughter was on defense. My daughter was on defense. Yeah, seemed like a good guy to talk to. Turns out he was just stepping down and retired from IBM, was kind of interested in some new opportunities, seemed like an interesting fit. He was an alum. He graduated from Binghamton University. Come on down. Let's come talk. Let's see what we can do. And to make a long story short, we managed to put together the beginnings of a relationship, and he came and joined the lab. It's not like I was paying him his IBM salary. I couldn't pay him his IBM salary. I wasn't even making his IBM salary.
Didn't need it.
Didn't need the IBM salary. He needed benefits. Nonetheless, we got together and we started working on this. So from that initial conversation, the kernel of an idea, graduate students crazy enough to think that my idea might have a chance of working, and then more importantly, after it doesn't work, he goes and makes it better so it does work. And now we have the beginnings of something that is probably worth patenting. So on that note, I'm going to turn the floor over to Bill, and he's going to tell you how we took this kernel of an idea from this company and these crazy guys that had a problem and started to turn it into a successful business, first and foremost by taking the professor and getting them out of the way, which is what I'm going to do literally.
Okay. So just hit the arrows on this, I guess, huh?
The arrows where you can hit the left mouse button.
Oh, okay.
The mouse will work to advance it. There you go.
There we go. So I'll talk to you a little bit about our company, our startup, that we have named ChromaNanoTech. And chroma has to do with colors and a nice big colorful C there. And nanotechnology, so we're making a new nanomaterial that we discovered. I'll put that. So it was done in the university in the lab. I accepted a position as a research professor in the chemistry department, working with Wayne Jones. And during my career in industry, I had issued 25 patents with my name on them. All right, so I had a lot of experience in processing intellectual property. I'd also done things like licensed other people for technology that I'd helped develop. I had also licensed other people's technology to the company I was representing in order to do that. So, and I was, in the research work that I was doing, I had also taken concepts that had been developed in research laboratories through development, through manufacturing, into the market, qualifying them, and being successful in the market. So there's a lot of skills that I brought to the table, and I had a little time on my hand because I had just retired. So I said, gee, this could be, let's try some interesting things. So I went out and we put in an NSF grant proposal for one set of technology using graphene and other nanomaterials, and we won that, and moved on from there. So we had a graduate student working for Wayne in the laboratory, and we had this crystalline chemical company group come in, and they were looking for an extension for their product through research in our laboratory. So we grabbed a strategic partnership for industrial resurgence, a SPUR grant, which is a New York State program through the engineering school. We won this grant, and it's tied to small companies. So this crystalline chemical company that Wayne mentioned was that company. And what it does is it provides support for a graduate student for a research line for 1 year. All right, so we put this student to work, and it turns out that what happened is Ken, and we'll see more about Ken a little bit later, taking actually a course with a professor at the university, was forced to perform some electrochemistry experiments. And he says, gee, I'm going to use an electrochemical process and process some of these dyes with some new materials and see what happens. And it turns out we found that with him working at the bench, we found a material that indeed extended the life of these dyes that crystalline chemical company was looking at, not just 10 or 15 degrees, so they were no longer decomposing at 100 degrees C. They were stable at 150 degrees C. They were stable at 200 degrees C. They were stable at 250 degrees C. They were stable to 300 C, and that's when they started decomposing. So Ken comes into my office and says, look what I found. We got to go publish this. And I looked at that, and I thought for a second, and I said, no. What we're going to do is we're going to go patent this first. I've seen patents. I've been involved with patents. I know what patents can do for a company. And this we're going to patent first. Then we'll have plenty of time to publish. And so that's what we ended up doing. So, and that instigated the formation of a small company university partnership. So because this was under a New York State controlled contract, there was an intellectual property agreement in place already. So any intellectual property that came out from this work was jointly owned by small company, which is this crystalline company that was mentioned earlier, and the university. So what we ended up doing is with this bench discovery, we decided to patent this material. So we got into an interesting set of discussions. The university actually had very little, Binghamton University, part of the State University of New York system, had little experience with intellectual property. I personally had more than they were used to being exposed to, given all the licensing and intellectual property experience I had from industry. So I kind of guided them over a period of time. However, it took us about 19 months to, after filing some disclosures, and so we did a provisional first. A year later, we did a non-provisional. And during this whole time, we're having discussions about the intellectual property agreement to allow a new company to commercialize the technology. After 19 months, which is a long time, I had never spent more than 6 months working in industry on any licensing deal ever. After 19 months, and we continued working in the lab on the technology, improving it, we finally concluded a licensing agreement. And with that, we incorporated and formed our company, ChromaNanoTech. And then, with that in hand, we said, okay, what do we have to do with a new company? All right. I mean, I came from a large company industry environment. I mean, we had a lot of the right ingredients, but to start a brand new company with no procedures in place, yeah, I know what's needed to be done, but there's no procedures. You start from scratch. So what I ended up doing, and Ken and myself, Wayne was involved as well, and we went to what was called a pre-seed workshop, and we got training and exposed to what's involved with a startup business plan. Putting it together, understanding a little bit about intellectual property, what lawyers can do it for you. It turns out you need 2 types of lawyers. One's a commercial lawyer that knows the business side of things, and the other's an IP lawyer, which allows you to help doing trademarking, and as well as your patent activities. All that needs to be all covered. You need 2 lawyers. All right. The next thing, after we did this pre-seed workshop, we continued working in the lab. I applied for a second program. It's called Nexus New York. And Nexus New York is based on a program that's typically run by NSF. It's called ICOR. Some of you may have heard of it. And so it's not exactly ICOR. It's actually, I think, a little bit better than ICOR. Because so what they do is, it does pretty much what ICOR does. You do a business canvas. So kind of assess what's the business environment that you're walking into. Next, you do a customer validation. And that customer validation is the most important thing you could ever do, and most people try to make their product first and never get that customer validation. What we did is, and as part of this program, is we cold called mostly, 100 potential customers. Okay, and we selected 2 applications for our technology, and I'll talk about the one that we primarily focused on here in a few minutes. But we called 100, and we had 2 separate kind of concepts of where we could go for marketing our technology. And after calling our 100 customers over a period of about 2 months, we actually verified both the technologies that we were looking to pursue. The one we actually, and I'll talk about it a little bit shortly, the one we actually pursued was a little bit simpler to do up front. But the other one is still hanging in the wings and is a possibility down the road as we move forward. And then the last thing is you want to have an MVP. That's not a most valuable player. What that is a minimally viable prototype. Something simple. It could be simple as a drawing or an animation. It doesn't have to be a working model of what you're actually doing, but it's something that kind of represents what you're looking to do with your technology. So I'll show you what one of those looks like in a little bit. Okay. So we went through this, and the other thing we did on top of this is, I mean, Wayne talked about writing proposals as a professor and getting NSF funding. That's in an academic environment. That's a little bit different if you're going after SBIRs, if you're going after DARPA money, for example, all kinds of Department of Energy, anything business related. So fortunately for the team, I had had a little bit of experience with that, and I'd had some success doing that in the past. So we started writing proposals for grants, and it took us 3 shots, but we got we won a grant, SBIR grant from the National Science Foundation. Okay, so we were successful writing grants, and we also wrote grants for state programs as well, and we won grants there as well. There's an organization called NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. They provide grants throughout New York State, and we were able to win some of those as well. So grants are very important, and so far we have actually funded our entire company largely through grants. We've had some sales, and the sales are ramping up. We had significant sales last year. We're multiplying that number this year, and next year will really be taken off. That's the way things are looking right now. The other thing we're able to do is leverage the university on our behalf. Because we have the ability to win grants, we can write subcontracts to the university for students to do research support and provide, and also we can use student interns, undergraduates from the business school, for example, to help write business plans for us. Graduate students working in our lab. Whatever we think we need, we can go out after it. Even hired an accountant, for example, to do some of my books for me. All right, they're excellently trained, inexpensive. The challenge with them is they may be only short-term staffing. You may have them for a semester or a year. You might even have them for 2 years, but short-term. All right, so you can leverage that. The other thing we have at our disposal is what's called the Advanced Diagnostics Laboratory. Basically, it's SEMs and TEMs and TGA mass specs and Raman spectroscopy and a variety of things, all kinds of tools that are necessary for characterizing our materials and our product. And so we've got world-class characterization equipment and staff. We get students that are trained on using the equipment, the graduate students particularly, and so we can put them to work using that equipment, analyzing materials for us and helping develop the technology. Okay. So I talked about a few things here. I'll give you a little bit of a timeline of some of the milestones and what we're doing here. So we first started our optical nanomaterial. We generated at the bench in December of 2012. We filed our first provisional patent in June, the following June. We developed after 19 months, our formal license in August of 2015. We formed a leadership team, which I'll show you in a minute. We actually generated our first kilogram of master batch pellets. We have a 500K purchase commitment for optical materials that we're generating. So far, we've almost exclusively funded ourselves on grant money. So we've had almost $700,000 of grant money funding us, and so that's wonderful because it's non-dilutive capital, okay? So in this whole process, with this Nexus New York program, not only do you want to be a scientist and an engineer and learn a few things about accounting, we also have to be a good businessman, good business sense, understand what it takes to pull a business together and make it flourish. And so what we're doing right now, the toughest things with nanomaterials, so we're making this nanomaterial today, the toughest thing to do is you can always make a little bit in milligram levels. What our target is to generate kilogram levels of material. And out of each production line that we generate, we want to be able to make a kilogram of material per week out of that production line. So that's what we're focusing on right now, and we're on the verge of that achievement at this moment. Okay. Here's the team that we put together. So a couple of us, you can see here, Dr. Wayne Jones, he's our key scientific advisor. And myself, I had over 30 years of industrial experience, research professor, and I worked over many of these years on nanomaterials and processing. So I had a lot of good background. This is the graduate student, Ken Skorenko, gotten his Ph.D. and is now living the dream. He's had research that generated a company that is now employing him as the chief technology officer for the company. So it's the dream of many graduate students. We have 2 additional partners. Actually, they're both actually work with as part of Crystal and Chemical Company, but they're also partners in this business as well. And then I have a very important individual, Bill Ritter, who's a very well-seasoned business advisor. He works with SCORE. He's on our board of advisors, and I had actually interacted with him when I was in industry many, many years ago. He retired, and then we reconnected, and he's been a valuable resource in helping wend our way through some of the business issues that come up that your average, professor and what have you may not know how to handle. Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about the technology so you have a feel for it. What we do is we make a nanomaterial, and it can go into a film. Now this, and can be applied to a window. So this is a picture just of an uncoated typical window, and you've got a full spectrum of light, including not only the visible, but you got infrared coming in and UV coming in. And let's say we've had a warm spate of weather recently. We all know what happens when sunlight comes through a window and you don't have a window dressings, coverings, and what have you. That sunlight coming through the window heats up the room, all right? So there's technology in the marketplace today that one of them is called low E, and that's what I'm describing here. And what it does is it has the capability of taking the visible light and the infrared and the ultraviolet coming in, and it actually reduces the amount of visible light. It actually, you can see the shading on this window here. It's darkened as you look at it, all right? So you're letting the visible light, some visible light through, and you're also blocking some of the infrared and the UV, and that has good benefits. The infrared particularly carries a lot of heat with it, and so if you do this right, you can block significant amounts of that heat content of sunlight and save 10, 20, 30, up to 50% of your electrical costs for air conditioning with these kinds of windows. The problem with these is it's expensive, but we'll get to that in a moment. Now let me tell you what ChromaNanoTech does. What we do is we make a plastic film, which is actually, the plastic film is used in the previous technology. They use it just as a, what's called a hard coat that protects the sputtered on material, which could be silver, could be indium tin oxide, it can even be gold. Variety of very expensively applied processes to put it down. It's put on in the window and protects it from exposure to air. Okay, so your typical window, it's a double pane window. You have a gas barrier here, typically argon, though it can be krypton and even xenon, other inert gases. And then what we do is we provide a material. It can be incorporated into plastic film. We put it on the outside of the window. As the light shines through, it's tuned. We use basically dyes, and those dyes basically tune and eliminates the infrared. It's tuned not to absorb in the visible, so you get all your visible light coming through. And we can add an additional dye, and we can actually even pull out some of the UV if we decide to. So the ChromaNanoTech technology, it participates in what's called passive solar technology. And what it does is it lets all the light in and keeps the heat out for summer applications. Okay, so here's a little bit of information on the competitive analysis. And this is what we learned going to school with this I-Core program as part of putting things together. If you have an untreated window, typically just glass, double pane glass, costs about $12 a square foot. The lowest technology that's on the market today for that same square foot, it ends up being $52 a square foot. So for the average homeowner, for example, if you wanted to put treated windows in your house today, you triple or more the cost of your window by putting this passive solar treatment here. Then there are other options you can go after: thermochromic, which changes on heat; electrochromic, you can electrically brighten or darken a window with an electrical current going through the window. ChromaNanoTech provides a solution. We put it into a polymer film that's already put in the window. All we're doing is adding our nanotechnology. Adds about $1 per square foot. And so what we would do is take and sell that material to film manufacturers. And we give it to them, we sell it to them as a drop-in additive. And what it does is it takes the film that they're making, which is about a 2-cent value add that goes into the window today, and all of a sudden they can sell it for approximately $1, all right? So they have a huge market incentive to incorporate our material. Small amount of this additive has a huge impact, and the dramatic increase in the film manufacturer's margins is enormous. So 1 kilogram of this optical material is enough to take care of the windows in 1,000 homes. And this is a market today that is very underserved unless you're in the top tier, top 1% of houses that are out there. Your average homeowner can't afford to triple the cost of his windows or more and try to get some technology like this. It's a huge potential market. And so that's what we're looking to go out and capture, working with these various customers, all right? So what we do is we produce the optical material, all right? And what we do is we can sell it in 3 different flavors. The one I've been mostly talking about is we put it into what's called a master batch pellet, but we can also incorporate it into an ink, and we can also sell it just as it's got a little bit, it's the actual nanomaterial by itself, all right? And there's a number of markets that we can go. So one that we're going after aggressively is this window film manufacturer market, all right? And the market size is enormous. We've sized it at $10 billion per year, all right? And if we go out and we think we can go out and capture 10% of it, so $1 billion looks like a real nice business for my startup. I get really excited about that. And oh, by the way, there are other things. We've been talking to other people that have interest, and pretty much wherever I go, I get additional ideas for where we can go. We've been talking with the Army. They have interest in this technology for specific applications. You can use it for infrared labeling and visible labeling, basically. There are even biomedical applications that we're in the process of putting an NIH grant in right now and testing out another grant on the academic side that'll test out the procedures to be able to move forward in this area as a biomedical opportunity. So I'm willing to entertain some questions at this point. Hopefully I'm kept us pretty much on schedule here. And so thanks a lot for your attention. So, yeah, go right ahead.
Looked like the film was applied to the outside of the window. I guess the filmmaker is responsible for making it weather adaptable or
right. So the film that we use is actually used in windows today, and it can be applied in a couple places. You can put it on the inside of the window in the gas barrier area, or we're putting it on the outside, and what that does is it allows you to block the heat so that the material we have is very stable to temperature, as I mentioned. So the film itself is a high temperature polymer. They do extrusion of that polymer at about 225 C, all right, which is higher than you'll typically reach in application conditions. So basically you rely on convection for taking that heat off the window on the outside, all right? So it keeps the heat outside the home, and you've got the insulation barrier of the gas barrier there to protect it from the heat going through.
Okay. The other technologies are reflective, and yours is absorptive.
Right, ours is absorptive and allows you to re-radiate. Right. Yep. Yeah.
So what are your current challenges in accessing the market? Is it getting the market, or is it?
We've developed a relationship with one of the key film manufacturers in the fenestration industry, and so what they're waiting for, actually, I mentioned this kilogram of material. The scale up is key for them. They need at least a kilogram of material to fit into their equipment to do the processing on a routine basis. I have some films with me. I can show you some a little later if you want to take a look at them. They've made some prototype films, but until we can scale and get it into a level where they can actually put it into their manufacturing equipment, we're not there yet. So it's not something you would predict when we first started to get a kilogram of this material. We were making milligrams, or 100 milligrams at a time. Well, we got to get it to a kilogram and be able to do that every week to be able to ship on a routine to a customer to satisfy his needs if we're really going to make this happen.
It's
So in an academic lab, typically, you do everything batch mode, right? So you have a student that will process something. Maybe it takes them a week to process it, 2 weeks to process it. And synthetically, as a synthetic chemist, we were very happy to get 100 milligrams or maybe a gram that we could do experiments on for months. But then, a manufacturer comes to us, as one did, it was on the slide, and said, listen, I'll give you a contract right now for $500,000, but I can't even consider this until you can guarantee me a kilogram a week. And grad students are cheap, but they're not that cheap.
Is that enough though? I mean, it's a big market, so that's one, do you need a kilogram a week per manufacturer?
Right, so we have a whole strategy we've put into place. We would expand, so initially one line, we expand in our current space. We're in an incubator where we're situated right now. We would expand to 5 lines, and then we'd outgrow our incubator. We go to 20 lines, all right, and then we would be able to expand out beyond there. So we would need, we've completely sized this up, what would it take and the capital would be needed. And for us to get there, we got to start first with this first kilogram a week capability, and then things just snowball from there on out. So we're on the verge of enabling that. We can do 100 grams a week at the moment. It's still not enough. We got to get to that kilogram level and be able to deliver it, qualify it, and deliver it every week on a routine basis to satisfy customers.
And think about this from a university research lab perspective, right? Because to go to that scale, you have to think very carefully about where you're doing that work. So wearing my chemist hat for a minute, it is okay to make an arrangement to lease a hood to run a reaction or a set of reactions. But if you're talking about a line, or if you're talking about what we have to go to, which is a continuous flow process, then the cost gets much higher for a wet space that can manage that, and you have to talk about incubator space that's wet. And we were fortunate, we didn't talk about it, but we've been able to now, and right now Bill's office and where the company lab sits is actually an incubator in a university lab where we lease, how many square feet are we leasing?
We're leasing about 600 square feet of lab space, and it's the most advanced lab space on the campus, as it turns out. Brand new building, our B200 lab. So it's.
I like the new chemistry building, but okay.
No, well, actually, yeah. So there's a few labs there too, but this is designed for incubator companies to come in and utilize. So we're in a very good spot there. See, there's a hand in the back there.
So, question waiting for you is, what's the culture or the balance of a faculty member who's going for tenure and commercialization? Because sometimes certain campuses have a conflict of that. Talk about.
So let me talk about some contrasts that I see between the SUNY system and UNH. You asked specifically about the culture around promotion, tenure and promotion. I would say it's very, very identical. And I would encourage assistant professors to really take a step back and think about that ROI before they go anywhere near this. Not that it's not productive and not that it's not going to lead to great stuff. It's that you got to get other aspects of your professional life in order first. Promotion from associate to full is it's more doable, but it's still under discussion. It's still not there. And I think this is a nationwide problem. This is not just a UNH problem. This is not just a SUNY problem. We have to think about the value of this side of things, and there's a lot of good research to be done, and a lot of it leads to traditional fundamental discoveries that we value very, very greatly, that we write papers on. We have published papers on this technology. We just shifted the order a little bit, got the patent taken care of first. The second difference that I want to point out, and Bill touched on this, and this is something that I'm sure everyone in this room, their head went there. He talked about New York State grants, right? We're not going to go after New Hampshire State grants, right? But federal grants do exist. And the other thing that does exist, and Bill normally wouldn't emphasize this as much to a New York audience, but I would emphasize it to this audience, is those New York State grants, 50% of that money comes from the company. And I've worked with a number of companies through that SPUR program. Every one of those companies, when they buy in for a small amount, they're willing to spend more because it's something they care about, and the more they put in, the more of that IP they own, right? When New York State puts in 50%, which is the way the SPUR program works, New York State puts in 50%, the company puts in 50%, they split the IP. If the company cares about that IP, in fact, our partners at Crystalline would be happy to put in more money and own all of the IP. So I think there is opportunity there. We don't have the greasing of the skids or the catalyst from New Hampshire at this time.
So would you call yourselves a New York company? Just wanted to ask that.
Yeah, we are. There is actually, there's a program in New York, you may have heard of it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, called Startup New York. We are actually, it's rare to actually have an actual startup company being a Startup New York company. All right. Usually they're trying to invite companies within the state to associate with universities, or from outside of the state to come and associate and come to the New York State. We're one of the unique ones that we're actually a startup originating within the state and taking advantage of that program. The nice thing about it, this is not a big deal in New Hampshire, I know, but in New York State it is. For 10 years you get a dispensation of any income tax, not only for the company, but all the individuals who work in the company. All right, that's a significant incentive. So right now, as my CTO and myself and our employees, they're not paying any state income tax on whatever they earn through the company. Can be a big deal.
Notice that's an incentive for companies coming to New Hampshire too.
Except the business taxes.
I didn't talk about that. I didn't say anything about that.
You're a scientific advisor now, but what were your expectations of what your role would be in the company at the start of it, and then where you are now?
When I started the second company, so when we started working on this one, it was very, very clear, and it was very, very clear that this was not going to be me-centric, right? It wasn't going to be me-centric because I didn't have the business expertise or the drive to chase the patent the way Bill did. It wasn't going to be me-centric because my original idea didn't work. It was a modification the graduate student made that really worked. That's great. That's the way it should work. We also had our partners that were from Crystalline. And so I knew it wasn't going to be me-centric. I think that when I think about faculty trying to spin out startup companies, I can't think of any. And I know probably about a dozen or so that have done this. I don't know any that have it be me-centric and were successful. We don't have the expertise, we don't have the skill, we don't have the background, we don't have the time, unless you want to just give up your faculty position and go run. And I do know one faculty member that did that, where he said, you know what, I'm having more fun over here. I don't need to do all this stuff. I'm going to go do that full time. By the way, any faculty in the room, I don't want you to do that if you're in SEPs.
I'll just mention one thing though. I'm still wearing 2 hats. So I am a research professor 50% of the time, and I'm CEO of the company, or president 50% of the time also. And so I've been straddling that for the last couple of years. If the company really takes off, I'll have to make a big decision whether I want to stay with the company or not. So we're not quite there yet. When that first kilogram comes along, then maybe we'll see what happens. You know. Yeah, you got a question? Yeah.
What's the total investment you would need in order to reach your capacity to design?
I've been having routine discussions with various investors, various corporations that are interested in investing in this technology. There's a few things I left out. For example, there's a major international chemical company. We entered, they had a contest for new nanomaterials. We entered that contest. We were a finalist in consideration for them. So I have, they're very interested in the technology, and they also want to see us scale up to this a kilogram a week per line basis to purchase materials, for example. There's another major, or actually multiple major chemical companies in the United States, international companies, that are interested in the technology as well. So I'm on regular briefings and basis with them. And then in addition to that, I've been discussing things with various investment firms as well. Not just VCs, but a variety of different investment opportunities there. It's possible that some of the companies we're talking about may buy us out. In fact, I've had some of those discussions as well. But they want to see that first proof of manufacturing. That's really the threshold for having serious discussions.
How much is the total investment that you're looking for to reach capacity?
I got to point this out. This is another place where faculty are distinctly different than business folks, because I would have answered the darn question. And he won't. And his strategy is right from a business perspective. If I was the CEO, and we've had this exchange before where I'm like, why didn't you just answer the damn question? We got a good answer. And he's like, no, they don't need to know that. This is all part of the business model. Now I'll let you say what you want to say.
Wow, it's a discussion.
Yeah.
Depends on what you want to do. I know what I would like to do, but
That's the question.
yeah, and so it depends on whether it aligns well with what your interests are.
Good luck, Dean, good luck. But I will say this, when the venture capitalists come for us, this is the dance that we watch. When the venture capitalists talk about, well, if I put $5 million in, what would my outcome be? You don't want to put a number out there in any sort of a public setting, because that's going to be part of that conversation. It's going to get tied up with equity. And as a faculty member, I'm delighted he has those conversations and not me.
In the right environment, I'm happy to have those discussions.
Why don't we go with Richard in the back, and then we can come down.
So in pharma, a lot of small companies would solve the scale-up problem by going to contract synthesis in the U.S. or abroad. So is your plan to do this yourself or to contract it out?
Our vision is to do this ourselves, and that's what we're doing. The thing is, it's a nanomaterial, and this particular nanomaterial, the patent we filed is fundamental. So we have composition of matter claims, the process, the structure, and applications. So we have, and the patent office has split our patent already. So I've had patents split before, so they don't start doing that unless they're serious. So we've been making, it's not formal, so we're patent pending at the moment. Even though we started, 4 years ago, it's still patent pending because it's complex. It's in a new kind of area. So you can't just go out easily and contract someone to do this stuff either. It's not that simple. If it was simple, we'd be producing in kilograms already. We got some pretty good brain power that we've brought to the table, to the bench to try to do this, and it's not an easy thing to do. But we've overcome some of those hurdles, and now we're on the verge of doing it. So we know what we're about. Yeah.
So when you reach this stage in the game where you sort of are, like you just mentioned, companies potentially talking about buying out versus scaling up and looking for investment, what are some of the key factors that play into that decision, whether to sort of get out now or stay in and go for long?
Well, we've had some discussions among our partnership. So if the right dollar threshold is hit and the right arrangements in terms of employment contracts and what have you are done, there's negotiations can be done. If it's just an interest in investing and not buying out, for example, we've got some scenarios we've thought about, and that we would discuss with an interested investor to help us move forward. One of the things is when we develop I talked about a threshold position where we develop 5 lines. We'd move out of our incubator into our own facility to develop 20 lines, for example. I have an investor already lined up that's interested. He's got a dollar figure in mind that would support that actual eventuality, and we've got a schedule that we're working to try to meet that. So you got to have a foresight, a strategic plan on where you want to go. That's what they want to see, and when they see that and they buy into it, you can make some interesting things happen.
I would add one more thing from a faculty perspective and a student perspective, because we actually had a student on that patent that was involved in that whole conversation. You're walking into human nature. I think of the 5 of us that are at the core, each of us had a different number when we started. And personally, another variable for me is, do I still see paths forward to try and do more? I don't want to let it go if I see the opportunity to do more technology in this direction. Where maybe our colleagues at Crystal Inn, they don't care what's new, they just want to hit the dollar sign, and so they push differently. So it's a conversation, and I think that's the important thing to keep in mind, is that as you have a group that's working on it, you got to figure out how you're going to work with everybody and get it in writing.
Right. Yeah. They're getting it in writing. I mean, when real dollars, as Wayne was talking about earlier, it's when it's hypothetical dollars. When there's no money to be had, it's an easy discussion to have. Once the money starts showing up on the table, people get real motivated and interested in exactly what happens and how you're going to handle that. So we're starting to get to that point where the real money is going to start showing up. So we'll see how we do. We've had those discussions. We've got scenarios laid out on how we would move forward.
And we still enjoy wine at our board meetings. So
exactly.
It's okay.
Exactly right. Right.
Young lady in the front was waiting to ask a question. Then we'll go back.
So my question is, you said that you did some coaching with the university on how the IDP process works.
Yeah, because I actually had more experience than they did. The university is at Binghamton, just at Binghamton. If we go up the road, Cornell University is not far from us. They've been doing this startup stuff for 50 years. All right, they have this nailed down. They know exactly what they're doing. Binghamton University is a relatively new, new man in the marketplace for this. They've just started to, in the last few years, to encourage patents and intellectual property and startup companies, and so they're looking to get their, the lay of the land and understand things better. So I've been helping them do that, based on my experience, and they recognize that. So, but that was why it took so long, because we not only have the other problem in New York State is there's a lot of bureaucracy. So I had to work through the Research Foundation, as it's called, at the university, and then we had to work through the Research Foundation in Albany, and so we could get to it. We could get an agreement locally. They go to Albany, they come back with, no, we got to do it this, X, Y, and Z. We have another discussion locally. Finally, I was talking directly to the Albany people. We finally got things closed, but it took 19 months to do that. I never imagined it would take that long. Never. I was after 8 months, I was pretty frustrated. So,
the other thing we learned early, and I think that Binghamton did right, and that is the recognition that you need to have true legal advice that's available to faculty at different stages. And so they have several attorneys, several offices at different levels in different areas that they're contracted with. And that can make a difference. On the UNH campus, we have that. We also have some in-house folks that have some of that expertise. Those conversations should happen sooner rather than later. I learned that very quickly.
Well, so my question actually was whether you've seen more startups now at the university now that you've done that.
yes. They are turning around licenses much faster. All right.
Probably because you complain about it every time you stand.
Every time, yeah. But it's set a precedent, and it's not one that I would like to see anyone else repeat. So we wanted the challenge is out there to get better at doing this, because time is money when you're in a company, and you take 19 months. I mean, until I had that license, I couldn't legally sell anything to anybody. All right, I could do research, I could do development, but if I generated a product and I had a customer come in and said, "Oh, I only need, 20 grams of this material, and I'll buy it for, some huge number," officially I could not sell it to them. So that is a big inhibitor. So finally, I decided I just act like I could sell it until we finally closed the license deal. So, yeah, it's a challenge. But you have to have that license from back to the company in order to be able to move forward officially. Yeah.
I think I'm going to assign we have time for one more question, and the gentleman in the back was waiting. That's you with the glasses.
Oh, cool. So, Dean Jones, I was wondering, do you think, or do you have any ideas of how we can kind of replicate this process that you went through with this company here at UNH, now that you're the dean of the engineering college?
Right. College of Engineering and Science. And God. First of all, I would not want anybody to live through my entire process. But the last 5 years, I think, with the exception of maybe shortening up the 19 months, is a process worth replicating. And I think that there are a number of things here at UNH that are very, very useful in place that I would have loved to have seen. Most of them are over here at UNHInnovation. I think about what's going on with the eCenter. I think about the challenges that we have for students. I think about the new I2 program that I just learned about recently. I think that in terms of the faculty engagement, I think that's going to grow slowly, and it's the kind of thing where you have to be in the right place at the right time. I think about my own story. That was a crazy idea that I had in the right place at the right time that led to the right graduate student who happened to be taking the right course that twisted the idea and went in a different direction. So you need a little bit of serendipity, but I think you need the fertile ground for that serendipity. Again, if you're an assistant professor, this is not fertile ground for you, but you should be aware of it because you should be doing some fundamental stuff right now that, yeah, it'd be good to talk to a patent attorney. Maybe just throw out that patent disclosure before you submit the paper. A little bit of that is okay. If you're an associate professor or a full professor looking for a new twist, something you want to push, something you did when you were a junior faculty member that now, now that you're kind of more stable and steady, your group is big enough, you got a couple of grants, you want to push out in that direction, I think the ground is very fertile here. I think that there are some people that are helping. And I also think that if we look right now at what's going on, for example, with the Army Initiative over in Manchester, I think we're going to see more of this activity. And I think we're going to have more folks that are doing this type of work that are looking for partners. And while we happen to grow internally, I think that there's lots of opportunities for faculty to bring expertise to the table for companies that are on the outside and doing other things, but need a university partner. And hopefully we'll be able to bring more university or more industry and corporate partners to the table that we can talk to about that. But don't want to follow the exact path I did. That would not be my advice. Well, listen, I want to thank everybody for coming and joining us. Bill and I are going to hang around for a while, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you.